Welcome back again. In this lesson, we're going to talk about asynchronous tasks, and that's basically starting a new class that's going to do things for us in the background, and then whenever those background stuff were done, we can get a notification that tells us this thing has been done, whether it is reading something from network, whether it is doing some heavy calculation on an image, whatever it is, we can actually leave it to a separate class to take care of it for us, and once the result is available, let us know about that. So let's see how we're going to do that. I'm going to head into Android Studio, and here I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to call it my Async Task app. And in my Async Task app, what I want to do is this. I basically want to have a button that button does something that is a bit of a heavy calculation. To emulate that heavy calculation, what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to go ahead and say, let's wait the application for 5 seconds. Let's delay the application for 5 seconds. What I want to do is I want to be able to, in the meantime, within that wait period, I want to be able to still interact with my user interface. So to do that, I'm going to go to my user interface. I'm going to say I have a button. Let's change this into a button. So that's already there. So here I'm going to say this one says run, and then there is an ID for it, and the ID is button. So this is my button. And then what else I want to have is I just want to have something that I can try my user interface. I want to know it's still working. So maybe I add I don't know, maybe a seek bar that, if it is there and it is functioning, I can, I can scroll in it, I can drag it. And if it is not working, obviously I can't do it. So let's go ahead and say, I want to get some of these, values for my constraints. Not like that. Let me move them up actually. Put them somewhere like here. Good. And then I'm going to infer all of these, and I'm going to say the height of this guy is always 44 dp. Actually the same thing for my button. So that's all I want to have in terms of my UI, and we could actually run this application now just to make sure that we know what we have in here, and we can see something in on our UI before I move into running the application. Now what we want to do is we want to press this button. We want that button to do something that is a heavy calculation, and then while that is happening, we want to be able to still interact with our UI. And once the result of that calculation was processed, we want to see a notification that says, hey, that calculation is now finalized. So let's head into Android Studio. In here, in my Android Studio, I'm going to go to my main activity, and within the body of my main activity, I'm going to start a new class. I'm going to say, let's say a private class, and I'm going to call this my Async Task class. And you obviously call it based on whatever they are meant to do. So I'm going to say this currently doesn't have any arguments. We're going to have to add some new arguments to it soon, but I'm going to say it is subclassing Async Task. And the async task needs to have some parameters, and the parameters, they always have to be void, and then the type of the parameter that you want. I'm gonna for now put a void in here, but soon enough I'm gonna change it because I want to do it like this so that you understand why we are going through this process. When you have an async task class that is subclassing from async, you must give it two functions, which is one of them is do in background, and then the other one is called onPost execution, which basically means what do you want to do in the background, and then also means what happens when that task was done. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say I have an override function do in background. This is the mandatory one, and I'm also going to go ahead and add onPost execute. So I will have these two implementations that they're going to take care of what I need to do. So let's go ahead in here and write our code. In here I want to do this. I want to say when we go to the background mode, let's wait for, let's say, 5 seconds. So I'm going to say thread the sleep for 5,000 milliseconds. You could assume that this is where you do something that is very process heavy. For instance, you go to your network, you read some content. For instance, you go to your room database, you read some stuff, and anything that's going to be of a heavy calculation. Now, what happens at the end of here is that you must return some sort of a value. So the type that I want to return in here is actually a string. So I'm going to go ahead and say this, instead of being void, is actually a string. And since it's a string, what I have to do in here is I have to go ahead and say return and let's return success. So all we need to know is that the background was, returned something successful. Now that I have that, I could actually use this part of the code, which is on post execute, which basically tells me what you want to get once the execution is over. And here's what I want to happen. I want to have a result which is of the type string. So I want to get a string, and you have to make it an optional because it may not, result back necessarily. Now that I have that one, here's what we're going to be doing. I don't want the super on post execute. What I do want is this. I want to say if result was not null, if we did get a result, if this optional value actually did get us a result, let's go ahead and say what I want to happen is I want to basically maybe toast something to my context, to my main application in here. Now, if we want to do that, we obviously need to get access to here. So that's what I'm going to say in here in my async task. I'm going to go ahead and say I have a variable for my context. So I'm going to say variable, let's call it context, which is of the type main activity. Maybe I can reformat this a little bit better. Now, here is the error that we are seeing in here, which is about having a string. And this is that last argument of the async task that I was talking about. The last argument should be of the same type that you're trying to return. So in here, I'm going to say the string is the value that I want to return. So async task should return a string for me. And now that error goes away. And all we have to do is I have to go ahead and say, once we go to the on post execute, do this. Say toast. Within the toast, make it in the context and say we are done, for instance. Or you could basically call a function from your context that is going to be based on your content that you found in your do background. Or you could have an adapter for a recycler view that you could, in here, you could say adapter that notify data set changed, or anything of the sorts that you think is going to be the communication that you want to do between this class and your main activity. Now, in my main activity, here's what I want to do. I want to go ahead in here and say button dot set onClick listener, and within the onClick listener, all I want to do is I want to call this class. I want to say my async class, and then within the parentheses of it is going to ask for my context. Context is obviously this. And then you still have to do one more thing, which is you have to say execute. And if you do that, it's going to basically run this class, which means it's going to run the background task. And it also is going to tell us what happens when the execution is finished. Let's go ahead and see if this is all going to work for me now. I'm going to run the application. I'm going to head into my Android emulator. And in here, once the application is loaded up, what I expect to see is this. I can, interact with my UI. I can press this button. Something is happening in the background. I can still interact with my UI. And then here, it says we are done. After 5 seconds, that thing actually got called. Let's try it one more time. I can still do things in the UI. The UI isn't frozen. And then here, after 5 seconds, that message comes and says you are done. So this is another way of running, multi-threaded tasks. It's another way to basically doing multitasking and putting your stuff that are heavy on a separate thread, making sure that it doesn't block your UI thread. After this, we're gonna head into seeing about coroutines. So let's keep it up to here and let's move on to our next lesson.